Eat human.
Les humains à leur meilleur.
C'est tu apogeo.
ピーク人間
One of my favorite humans that I've never met in person, Lierre Keith, shares a ton of information with us today. We talked for almost 2 hours and could have gone longer. You may recognize her from the Netflix film The Magic Pill. She was a hardcore vegan for 20 years and lived a lifestyle with passion. I won't give away everything, but she wholeheartedly enjoys animal products now and wrote a book that thoroughly refutes the 3 major tenets vegans and vegetarians stand on. They claim a plant-based diet is better morally, better for the environment, and superior nutritionally. As I know, and you at home probably are aware of by now, the opposite is true on all accounts. We also bring up the sapien movement near the end as a way to join together and fight the vegan propaganda, spread the truth, and work to improve the way we do agriculture and feed humans. The site is live at sapienmovement.com, and you can also find the group on Facebook and the Twitter and Instagram accounts, all under that name. The goal is to end industrial agriculture and eat ancestrally. Other than that, it's not defined yet. Join us and help us figure out what we can do to make a difference. As we speak, I'm in San Diego filming with some awesome researchers and doctors. We still really need your help if you haven't pre-ordered and contributed to the film. It's called Food Lies and it's on Indiegogo.com. Thanks so much to everyone who has supported us so far. Let's hear from Lierre. All right. Thank you so much, Lierre, for being on the podcast. I'm really excited to talk to you because I just finished your book. I just saw you on The Magic Pill, actually, and you seem to come up on half the podcasts that I've done already.
Well, thanks for having me on.
So I want to talk about your book. Even though it's not a new book, you're not on some PR circuit trying to slang your book, but it's been about 9 years, but I just really enjoyed it. I've done a lot of research and you put it all together in one awesome package, plus so much more. So yeah, let's start from the beginning. Maybe you can tell us your journey and how you got started with veganism and what happened.
So I became a vegan when I was 16 years old. Which is actually pretty common. A lot of people start being vegan when they're teenagers. Obviously, it's a time of life when you're exploring everything and trying to figure out your place in the world. I also became a vegan in the way that most people do, in that I met somebody else who was a vegan, and I was convinced. And that is actually how most people become converts to vegetarian and veganism, is that they meet somebody else. And that one-to-one contact has a big effect. So I met another teenage girl whose parents were vegans, and they actually moved to where we were all living in order to be closer to other vegans. And so she was into it, and she had all kinds of facts and figures and horrible pictures of factory farming and the whole 9 yards. And I was horrified, as we should all be, by photographs of animals in situations of torture, essentially. And it didn't take long, 2-3 weeks. I was ready to sign up for life. So I did it. I went full on vegan. I was never a vegetarian. That was a stage I skipped over entirely. It was all or nothing. So I started reading all the right books and engaging in all the right things. And I, learned how to make brown rice and beans and eat tofu and all of that. And it was a lot harder back then. They didn't have all of those kind of, fake real food.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
I mean, they didn't have those kind of meat analogs and, the weird half melty cheese stuff. And they didn't even have like tofu ice cream at that point. So you really had to mean it, in 1980 or 82 if you were going to be a vegan. So anyway, I did all that, took it up with, all the force that I had as a very ideologically motivated, inspired teenager. And it did not go well. I did it for 20 years. Which is kind of a horrifying thing to admit. I say that with some pride, but also, of course, with some horror, because I blew past every boundary that my body put up in terms of, you are destroying yourself with this, and I didn't listen. And that's part of the problem with, any diet that becomes more ideological than not, is it becomes almost impossible to actually examine what you're doing. And part of the real problem with being a vegan is that it's not just what you eat. It really becomes your identity, right? It becomes who you are, as a person. And when it becomes that much of an identity, any counter information feels like a threat. It's a threat to your very sense of yourself. So I couldn't absorb anything else.
Yeah, you're kind of in denial about it, and you refuse to believe it's the diet. You think it's something else.
It can't be the diet, because the diet is the best thing ever. It's going to save the planet. It's going to save all the people. It's going to save the water. It's going to save the animals. It's going to save global warming. Like, there's no way that this beautiful, holistic, peaceful way of life could possibly do harm. Like, there's no way you can let that thought into your brain. So you're in cognitive dissonance for however long it takes. And for me, that was decades. And meanwhile, my body just fell to pieces, which is what will happen on these diets if you do them long term.
Yeah, please talk about that more in whatever level of detail you want to, just about your personal health.
Sure. Well, on one level, there's nothing as boring as other people's medical problems. So
Yeah.
try to keep this one brief. But the very first thing that happened was that I ended up with really bad blood sugar problems. So I was living with, worse and worse hypoglycemia. And that, of course, is very common. Anybody who eats a diet that's essentially carbohydrate, this is not the diet that humans were designed to eat. And you're going to wear through those insulin receptors. So that started happening to me almost right away, where I would get these just horrible blood sugar crashes. And I didn't know what it was. I didn't have a name for it. All I knew was that if I didn't put food in my mouth now, I felt like I was going to pass out. And indeed, that's true. I mean, that's what a low blood sugar incident is. Like, you can lose consciousness. In fact, it's a biological emergency. So that urge to put food in your mouth is the correct one. But, the problem is what's causing it. And now I understand all this, but at the time I had no idea. So that got worse. Every year I just was more and more hypoglycemic, and I didn't understand it. So by the end, I had to eat about every 20 minutes to feel like a normal person. And
wow.
That's not good. I mean, nobody can think that that's a good way to have to live. But that's what happens. You're on that roller coaster, and, your blood sugar is too high, and it demands an insulin surge. So out comes the insulin.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, it's a blunt instrument. We are not made to ingest that amount of sugar. And so insulin then grabs everything that it can, and it takes it out of your bloodstream as fast as it can, shoves it into mostly your fat cells for storage. Now you can't access it. So now you're even more exhausted than before you started. But in the meantime, now your blood sugar has crashed because too much sugar was taken out. So now you've got this tremendous, just horrible craving for food because you're shaking and you're sweating and you feel like you're going to black out. And that's what you do every single day, when you're eating those high carb diets. It's just over and over and over again. And of course, the food you reach for is some kind of sugar or carbohydrate. So you're only making it worse each time. Problem number 2 was terrible depression, anxiety stuff. That just falls on you like a stone when you eat these diets. And I understand now, why that's true. Your brain can't function without fat. Your brain is in fact 80% fat, just matter. That's what it's made out of. And then there's all the different amino acids that are the precursors to all your neurotransmitters. So the most famous one, of course, is going to be tryptophan and serotonin. We all know about Prozac as an SSRI. Well, that's a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So we all get that serotonin has something to do with depression. The way that your body makes serotonin is it takes an amino acid called tryptophan, and it goes through a few stages, but eventually that is the building block for all your serotonin. And the problem with these low protein diets is there really aren't very many good plant-based sources of the amino acids that you need for good brain health. And we need a lot of them. I mean, we just do. Our brains require them in order to have a stable mood state. And, serotonin is one. It's very, very hard to get tryptophan out of plants. And this is why people who eat these kinds of diets, this has been studied, multiple times across the world. It absolutely have way more mental health issues, depression, anxiety, suicide. They even have a higher murder rate, which is really kind of creepy and weird, but that is what has been discovered. I've never heard an explanation as to why that's true, but absolutely, more violence, more violent outbursts, anger, problems with anger management. And I've been through all of this. I mean, it's like, I remember what it felt like to be that unstable all the time. And you don't know yourself what's going on. It's like crazy stuff. I wouldn't find, I'd lose my wallet or my car keys, and, you'd just be in a puddle on the floor crying. Like, it shouldn't be that bad to misplace your car keys, but it was each and every day. So these little tiny things would just completely destabilize, whatever mood you'd managed to crawl into for the day. You'd lose it pretty quickly. And that was just, we sort of considered that normal in my friendship circle because we were all eating these kinds of diets. It's not till you get out of it that you think that was an insane way to live.
Yeah.
So all of that happens, and again, pretty quickly. You use up, that kind of fat and protein stuff in your bodies. You use that up pretty quickly. There's not a lot of stores. So once it's gone, your body is just limping along. Your poor brain is doing what it can, but there's not really much to draw on once you use up the stores.
Yeah, so there's kind of like the honeymoon phase where everything's great. You're being a healthier person and eating the vegan diet, and whoa, this is awesome for 3 months, 6 months, and then it kind of falls apart once those are depleted.
Yeah, the average person who tries a vegan diet does not even last 3 months. Most people realize pretty quickly that they're tired, exhausted, cold, depressed. It's not working. It's really just the people like me who are the out and out fanatics who can persist with this. And we do it to our detriment. So, all right. So there was the emotional stuff. About 2 years into being a vegan, I started to get this very strange, pretty all-encompassing pain in my spine. And it took me quite a while to get a final diagnosis on that. But as it turns out, I have degenerative disc disease. So this is permanent. I have now lost 5 discs in my lower spine. And once the process starts, you can't really stop it because that's the biomechanics of the spine. Once that bottom disc goes, you've got way more pressure on the one above it and then the one above that. So this is just the inevitable progression now of what I did. People's spines are not supposed to start falling apart at age 18 for no reason. Clearly, this was nutritional. By the time I was done being a vegan, I basically lived on the couch. I only stood up if I had to. I was in so much pain. I could only sit up for maybe half an hour at a time, and I could only stand up for a few minutes at a time. And that's just how much pain I was in. Having eaten a more appropriate diet for humans, it took 4 or 5 years to repair some of that. And my life is dramatically bigger now, but I will always be in pain. And I mean morphine level pain from my spine. And that's very common with people who eat these diets. Again, you end up with all kinds of joint problems. And that was what went first on me, was my spine. So
that's so crazy. So usually you don't hear this side. I know people who are vegan. I know people who think that there's nothing bad about it and it's only sunshine and rainbows. So no one likes to talk about this part, it seems.
No, and there's 2 things going on. One is that the people who realize that it's doing them damage leave, right? So it's a self-selecting community, and they're not allowed back in. I mean, there can be some very cult-like behavior in that community. So once you're gone, you're not allowed back in, and no one's going to hear your story. So if you go online and you're a brand new vegan and you're trying to meet other vegans and you're all excited, you're only going to hear from the people who are still saying very good things about it. You're not going to hear about the 98% who tried it and left.
Yeah.
With damage, But I will say, in my position, having written this book, being somebody who's, fairly public about my position on all this, I get these emails all the time, and I mean almost on a daily level. I have now met other people with exactly my medical condition from doing exactly this to themselves. And I will often get emails from people in their early 20s, who have very similar complaints, like my knees hurt, my hips hurt, I wake up every morning, my joints are killing me. And, and half the time they know it's the diet and they can't find a way out. And they need someone like me to hold their hands and say, you're right, it is the diet. It's not going to get any better. There is life afterwards, but it will be a very hard year. I'm not pretending that this is easy on anyone. You don't give this up without a struggle. I know how much your world is about to collapse on you, but you only get one body. You can make new friends. You can find a new worldview, but your body, once it's gone, it's gone. And those joints is permanent. You're not going to get them back. So if you are recognizing harm, it is way better to stop now. Try something different. You can always go back to it if it doesn't help, but I can pretty much guarantee that some animal fat and a good chunk of minerals every day, you're going to be feeling a lot better pretty quickly.
Yeah. Why don't you recap the other health problems as well?
Well, I had horrible dry skin. I mean, it was so bad it would keep me up at night, and it was bleeding. Your skin isn't supposed to be that bad, especially not when you're young. So that was that. But that was 4 days of eating eggs, and I was in a completely new body in terms of my skin. That was like overnight, dramatically better. These fantastic results with that. So that was great. I also, very typical for women who are on any kind of low-fat diet, completely messed up my reproductive system. I essentially didn't menstruate for that whole 20 years and had all kinds of problems with that. And I didn't actually want to have a baby, so that didn't affect me, but it would have been heartbreaking if I was someone who had wanted to have a child, because there's just no way. I mean, it wasn't working. So
Yeah.
out of the question. And now I understand. It's cholesterol, has been so vilified, but it's this incredibly life-giving substance. All of the hormones in your body, every last one of them, uses cholesterol as like the mother hormone. That's the base substance from which they're made. And that includes all of your sex hormones. All of your sex hormones are made from cholesterol. If you're not eating any, you're not going to have any. You've got no way to produce any. And your body does this pretty cool thing. It says, well, we'll put reproduction on hold when you're healthier, when there's more food and the famine is over. We can talk about having a baby. For now, the hormones you need are these ones over here. Those are going to keep you alive from moment to moment. So we'll keep producing those so that you keep breathing. At some later point, we can talk about babies. Of course, that later point never comes if you never give it more cholesterol. So this is true for both men and women. Fertility is very deeply affected by what we eat. And if you're not getting a good chunk, again, of animal fat every day, you're not ready to reproduce. You just don't have the nutritional stores to make that possible. So all kinds of stuff with that happened. I ended up with really bad uterine fibroids, and I'm pretty sure that was the soy. Of course, you can never prove these things, but yeah, I mean, I ended up with a lot of problems in that regard as well. I started eating, the more appropriate diet. I found all the Weston Price information and started reading all the really great paleo stuff. And I took all the soy out of my diet, started eating broth every day. It wasn't 2 weeks later that I finally started menstruating right away. It was like 2 weeks. And honestly, from that point, it was like clockwork. I mean, this is one of those really dramatic things where 20 years, basically nothing. And then 2 weeks later, boom, you get a period.
Yeah.
And then every 28 days, you can set your watch by it. And I was just horrified and amazed. I mean, it's amazing what the human body can do when you give it what it needs, but also that just creeping horror of what have I done to myself? This is just so bad. You're looking at cancer, God knows, what in the future. Like, you can't run that kind of an experiment on your own body and expect it to come out well. So anyway, I'm happy to let my life be used as a cautionary tale for other idealistic young people. But these are the things you can expect. You're going to destroy your bones and your joints. Your mental health is just going to crash into nothing. Your reproductive life, your sex life, you're going to devastate that. This is all, we understand all these things. They're very direct, step by step. I also ended up with a condition called gastroparesis. And this is very common amongst people who are diabetic or have blood sugar problems. And I understand the chemistry of it now, but essentially I damaged my stomach's ability to digest my food. I don't make the correct amount of acid anymore. I probably never will. So I'm on medication for that. And that, again, is just absolutely direct what will happen if you eat a high-carb diet for too long. So I think that's mainly what I did. And it's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. Well, I mean, it needs to be said to let people know what could happen. And this is not just an anecdotal story. I just want to make, you kind of said that, but that we have direct knowledge of biochemistry. We know how this stuff works. And you have, thousands of emails by now of this happening to other people. This is not just a Lierre Keith problem.
No. And honestly, if any of your listeners, if any of this is happening to you or if anybody in your life, if you have questions about this, obviously, we can't spend too much more time on it during this show, but you are welcome to email me. I can walk you through all of this. I understand exactly what happened to me step by step. It was all revealed once I was willing to look at the information, and I'm happy to disclose all of that to anybody who needs it. So feel free to write to me if you have further questions.
That's a nice offer. Thank you for that. Yeah, why don't we jump into the arguments against the vegetarian myth? So you break it down so nicely in your book with the moral argument, the political sort of environmental argument, and the nutritional argument. So let's just go one by one. We kind of covered some of those, but what's your story with the moral side? Because a lot of people, that's the one that they're never going to get past. So it was really cool to see, it was really cool to see that you took a great approach on that and made a really compelling case over the course of the first 90 pages of your book.
I am always very clear that the values that underlie the vegan ethic are not the issue. Okay, so justice, sustainability, compassion, right? These are the only values that are going to get us to the world that we need. I mean, I hope that is the world that we all want. A world of abundance for all, a world where we care about every living creature. I think for a lot of people who start down this path, they are driven by those values. And that's still the motivating ethic of my life. That has not changed. The problem is information. Right. So there's this huge gap in the knowledge base that we have from which we make our decisions. So we live in an agricultural society for 10,000 years. We come from people who have been doing agriculture. And that's how long back into, the human past this activity goes. But we've been humans for, depending on where you want to start, 4 million years, 2.5 million years, a long time. There were ancestors of us out there on the planet. We didn't do this thing called agriculture. So what is the difference? So what is this special thing that humans do? So we have to understand what agriculture is. And on a very brute level, you take a piece of land, you clear every living thing off it. And I mean down to the bacteria. And then you plant it to human use. So all the other life that's supposed to be there is gone. Okay, it's been eradicated. So I call this biotic cleansing. Right? We've all heard of ethnic cleansing. Well, this is biotic cleansing because it's every living thing, and that's what agriculture is. In its most brute form, that's just what the activity is. Mm-hmm. If you think about a cornfield, there's nothing there but corn, or a wheat field, nothing but wheat, and there should be 25 plants per square meter in a prairie or a grassland. And all of them are gone. And all we've got is this one plant that humans value. So all of the animals that should be living there as well. On this continent, there were at one point 60 million bison. They're gone. Okay, there's 1,200 bison maybe. And there's not even, in terms of purebred bison, most of those actually have other bovine genes in them at this point. It's kind of scary. We've traded them in for 40 million really sick cows. Mm-hmm. So there was so much lushness on this continent. And all of that's been eradicated and in a very short time. And that's what agriculture is. So 98% of the world's old growth forests are gone and 90% of the world's grasslands are gone. And what destroyed them was agriculture, was humans thinking that we had a right to take over that land and just grow humans on it. So multiple problems from this point forward. The first is that this is what's called drawdown. Okay, you can't just take without there being an effect. Mm-hmm. And the more you take, the fewer resources there are left for the next year, the next generation. So you're drawing down things like trees and water and species. In fact, at this point, 200 species are going extinct every day. That is a really grim number. I mean, it's really hard to let that penetrate your consciousness. 200 species. Okay, so 200 individual, unique species that have been around for how many? 20 million, 40 million years, gone every single day. And it's mostly because of this thing called agriculture, where we are taking their habitat. They've got nowhere else to live. They've got nowhere else to go. And that's because of agriculture. So before agriculture, we did this other activity, which essentially was hunter-gatherer. And we lived inside biotic communities. We did not enforce ourselves across that community. We were a part of it, just one member of it, and we very humbly took what we needed and gave back, which is what every other species did. And everything changed 10,000 years ago. And there's maybe 14 places around the globe where people started doing this, over 10,000, 8,000, 7,000 years ago. It always starts in river valleys, and the reason is actually really simple. In river valleys, that you can expect a lot of disturbance because there's floods all the time from rivers. So you have a lot of what are called annuals. There's a lot of annual grasses in those areas. And all of the plants that we eat now, agricultural foods, corn, wheat, soy, whatever, they all started as annuals, annual grasses. And the difference between annuals and perennials, there's a few differences, but mostly it's a question of size and a question of time. So perennial plants have very deep roots because they live a long time. They have time to build those roots. So if you think about a tree, right, that's a perennial plant. Nobody's going to grow that big in one season, right? But an annual, you think more of like the flowers you might grow in your garden bed or whatever. That's an annual. They're short, they're sweet. They only live that one season and then they're gone. They do one thing well though, and that is they produce really big seeds because their whole genetic future is wrapped up in they've got one way to reproduce, and that's a seed. So their seeds tend to be much bigger than perennial plants. Strawberries actually have seeds, but nobody ever thinks about them because they're tiny. Strawberries have way better ways to reproduce because they can live many years. So mostly they reproduce by runners. All of you gardeners know what I'm talking about. But those little tiny seeds, nobody cares. Not true for things like corn and wheat and soy. They got much bigger seed heads. So it turns out that it's sort of worth the effort for humans to harvest them. So, there's some evidence that sometimes people would harvest these kinds of things, every once in a while in river areas. And then the problem is, of course, that that takes over. So all of a sudden humans are harvesting these seeds more and more, and they're breeding them to be bigger and bigger. And now the plants are dependent on the humans to get themselves planted. They can't plant themselves. They're too big. And that means that the humans have to clear the land. So all of a sudden overnight, in various places around the world, human culture changes entirely. And they're living these sedentary lives based on really backbreaking labor. Farming is no fun. And their health status just declines dramatically. So anywhere where you see that switch from hunter-gatherer to agriculturalist, pretty much overnight, people shrink 6 inches and their teeth fall out. So, I mean, the health status is just, there's no question. And archaeologists can look at a bone and can tell you in 10 seconds whether it was from a farmer or from a hunter, because the hunter's bones are always long and strong and dense and disease-free, and the farmer's bones are going to be short and brittle and riddled with signs of disease. So it's a disaster for human health, and it's a disaster for the environment. It's a disaster for the planet, because bit by bit, we have now taken over basically the entire globe. Anywhere that agriculture could have gone, it has now gone. So the pattern, up until recently, the pattern was you had a civilization would rise. It would do this thing called agriculture, because that's what makes civilization possible. And then it would collapse because it's inherently drawdown. It's an inherently destructive activity. And there's no civilization that has lasted longer than 2,000 years. They last somewhere between 800 and 2,000 years, because that's literally the length of time that the soil lasts. After that, the soil is just gone. They've turned it into a desert, and the entire thing will collapse.
I think that's so cool. Yeah, I think that's so interesting. That I haven't heard that until you brought it up, that's really the longest civilization. You can look at Aztecs or Mayans. You can look at anything. And it's just all about input and output. And people don't understand this. And this is what I'm trying to get across to people, is that when you're just doing monocropping, it's only taking. That's drawdown. You said it. But it's just all taking and no giving. And if you're going to raise animals and plants together properly, it is a harmonious cycle that is actually regenerative, because there is the input and the output.
Yeah, and to put a number on it, one season of planting your basic annual crop like corn or wheat, one season, you can blow through 2,000 years of soil in one season. So like on the first day of the Dust Bowl, in South Dakota, there were farms that lost all of their topsoil in one single day.
Wow.
One day it was all gone from the wind. And that's because there were no perennial roots. All the prairie grasses were gone. And all it took was a little bit of a windstorm and it was over. And you can go on the computer, onto the internet, and look at the photographs, because photography had already been invented at that point. And it's just this massive cloud of dust.
Yeah.
People are just buried alive in this dust. It was unbelievable. There was so much dust from South Dakota, from the Midwest. It covered boats crossing the Atlantic Ocean. So that's how far the dust went. And right now, this is still happening. In China right now, the dust storms can be so bad that you can watch the cloud cross the Pacific Ocean on satellite images.
Oh my God.
And it comes into the United States, and then it hits the Rocky Mountains. And at that point, it comes down because the Rockies are so high. So at that point, it will drop. But it's literally dust from China is creating asthma in children in Denver, Colorado right now. So this process is ongoing. It's not like we figured it out and stopped doing it. We are still just full steam ahead on the agricultural project. And I really want the people who care most about the problem, people who take up vegetarianism, tend to be people who care so deeply about the planet, about our future, about the lives of animals, about all the suffering. I want them to understand this, that when you take up agriculture, this is inevitable. It's mass extinction. It's drawdown across the planet. Like, we've had 10,000 years and we've trashed the planet. That is what agriculture is. It's not the way of peace and justice and compassion. The animals have no homes. Vertebrate evolution has come to a halt because there's not enough open space anymore. And it's because of agriculture. That's the main injury that we've done to this planet.
Veganism and vegetarianism is supporting the thing that they're trying to stop. And they don't really either admit it to themselves or just know about it, just a lack of information that this is doing this much damage.
I grappled with this for 20 years. It was so hard to come to terms with this. I'd already been a vegan for a few years, and I remember taking a class in college, and it was a biology professor. He knew what he was talking about. And this sentence, I remember, he said, the moment you put a plow to soil, you degrade that soil. And it just fell like dominoes. I was like, well, okay, I thought I was doing the right thing. This was supposed to be the way forward. But if he's right, it's all just going to collapse, because every day there's more people. Every day we're going to need to take more land. Obviously, there's only so many square inches of planet Earth. We've pretty much taken it all, and we're just destroying it bit by bit. This problem is only going to get worse and worse. And he's like, yeah, you're right. This is exactly the issue. And there it was, just laid out before me. And I couldn't back down from veganism, but I also couldn't back down from the truth of what he was showing us. I mean, he had pictures from all over the globe of what it looked like, the places like Iraq and Iran where agriculture first started, and they're just desert. They were forests so thick that sunlight never touched the ground. And now it's just desert, right? We've all seen those pictures. Like we know what Iraq looks like, and it's just, that's what agriculture does. So by 1950, the world was out of topsoil. We had pretty much blown through every region that was capable of being, kind of the breadbasket of whatever. It was gone. We had pretty well done it in. At that point is when should have come the natural collapse that is the inevitable endpoint of all civilizations. That should have happened then, and it didn't. And the reason that it didn't was because we upped our game as humans. We figured out how to take oil and gas, turn them into usable nitrogen, and keep going. So instead of eating soil at this point, we're eating oil. So this thing called the Green Revolution, and that's what it was. It was learning how to synthesize nitrogen out of oil and gas, and then breed plants that would produce very short stems and as big a grain head as they possibly could, which they've done. I mean, we've reached the biological limits now of what plants can do with that. And that's it. And of course, they also demand huge amounts of water. These plants are incredibly thirsty because they're growing at such an extraordinary rate. So at this point in places like Egypt, South Dakota, India, pick your country, they're using oil drilling equipment to actually get to the water because the water table has dropped so far because of the thirsty nature of these crops. So all of this is to say, back to your original question, there is no way you can look at this primary destruction of the planet and say that this is compassionate to the living world. I mean, it's not. The problem is, that we tend to just look at our plates and say, well, is there something on my plate that had a mother or a face? Is there a piece of meat on my plate? And if there's a piece of meat on my plate, I'm going to call that death, and I'm not going to eat it. I need to be nonviolent and kind and compassionate. So I'm not going to eat that. I'm going to eat this other stuff. And never mind that the wheat is the bare bones of the prairie and all those dead bison. Never mind that the rice is the beginning of global warming because rice agriculture was in fact the beginning of global warming. It doesn't matter. If there's not a piece of meat, I'm going to say it's the food of compassion and joy and life and peace and all that. And the question is way bigger than what's dead on your plate. The question is, what died to get that food onto your plate? And if you're eating agricultural foods, the answer is the entire planet. That's the thing that people have got to face.
Yeah, and everyone probably has heard by now about these giant tractors killing ground nesting birds and squirrels and baby deer when they harvest the wheat. But there's more that I didn't really think about. There's just so many other ways that animals die and the landscape changes. So what are those specifics?
Yeah, so first of all, you've removed all the habitat. So the trees, the grasses, whatever was there is gone. So everybody that needed to live there can't live there. They have no home. They have no food. There's nothing but bare dirt. The bare dirt itself, at one point was alive. Soil is an incredibly biodiverse habitat for other creatures. 1 tablespoon of soil should contain over 1 billion living creatures. And that should just blow our minds. I mean, we can't see them without microscopes, but every last one of those creatures is doing the basic work of life. Okay, they're doing that recycling of nutrients that you and I cannot do for ourselves. So the entire cycle of life depends on those creatures and what they do for us. And we're killing them all. There's nothing left at the end of agriculture. So all that dies. And then as the soil is essentially baked and pounded into dust, if there's even the tiniest bit of slope on the land, which most land is going to slope one way or another, it all runs off. And where it runs off every time it rains, where it's going to go is the nearest waterway. So the rivers and the streams are now clogged with this dead topsoil. And what that means, of course, is that all the creatures that live in the water are now dead too, because they're suffocating from the dirt. And it also means that nearby trees, a lot of times in grassland areas, there'll be trees that line in a sort of riparian area, along whatever river there is, because there's enough water for trees there. So, if you travel through any section of the Midwest that's still even a little bit intact, you'll often see, say, cottonwood trees along the rivers, and then that'll just go back to grass. And that's a lot of what the world should look like. But those trees die because the water table drops so far, because it can't be recharged, that all the trees die as well. And then without the trees shading the water itself is now too hot for the fish. So whatever fish should be there, if they can survive the silt, they're now dead from the temperatures being too high. So it's like every step further you go from the agricultural activity, it's just nothing but death and destruction across the entire region. And that's the problem. Like, that's what we've done for 10,000 years. And there's not a better, kinder way to do this. This is the nature of the activity. And I think that's the hardest thing to face, I think, when grappling with all this, because it's kind of overwhelming. Like, wow, 10,000 years of this. And our whole way of life is based on it. But there's no other way forward but to face the facts.
Yeah. Here's some other facts. Maybe we could cover some facts like how much water it takes to grow rice or other plants compared to what it takes to raise an animal properly. Or you could even go back to your square of land where there's one way of removing all life from it and planting corn. And then what would be the opposite of that?
Right. So a lot of times you'll hear figures from various, vegetarians, animal rights people, and they'll say absolutely ridiculous statistics about the amount of water that it takes to grow like a pound of beef. And what's true about those numbers is if you just look at factory farming, yeah, that's true, because it takes that much water to raise the corn that is then fed to the cow. So we can all grant that this is a ridiculous waste of water, a terrible thing to do to animals, like it's just no good for anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And we can all just agree and then move on.
Yeah.
So the truth of this is that cows don't actually drink that much water. And when they do drink water, it comes out the other end. And they are nature's mobile watering units. Like that's what keeps grasslands alive in the summer is the activity of ruminants, because they are still spreading fertilizer, they're spreading water. And the other thing that they're spreading, which a lot of people don't understand, is the actual biological activity that regenerates life. And the way that they do this is inside a ruminant it's a very interesting thing inside a ruminant. What's going on is grasslands are not forests because they're dry. Okay, there's not enough water for trees. So there's these other plants called grasses, and they evolved in much lower moisture conditions. And most of the activity in a grassland happens below the surface of the soil. So we don't see it, but it's huge and it's vast.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of what's going on down there is this this ferment of biological activity, and it's all this bacteria. And that's what they're doing. They're degrading things that have died and then turning nutrients back over to other living things. So it's keeping everything going. And when it gets very dry on the surface of the soil, all of that stops because the bacteria have to withdraw. They can't survive without enough moisture. But what keeps the bacteria still there is the ruminants inside the body of a ruminant. That's what a cow is carrying around, or a bison, or name your creature. They're carrying those bacteria. They usually have multiple stomachs, usually 4, and inside is just this vast fermentative vat. And so the bison eats the grass. That's what it looks like to us, but actually what that bison is doing is feeding the bacteria inside her rumen. That's why they're called ruminants. They have this thing called a rumen. And so she's not actually eating the grass. She's giving that grass to these bacteria. And the bacteria are actually the ones that can break down the cellulose. The cow or the bison herself is actually eating the bodies of the bacteria. So she's in one way farming the bacteria. So she's feeding them and then they feed her. So this idea where everything's always a hierarchy and, oh, we're so mean because we eat cows. I was like, well, but the cow is eating the bacteria. It's actually a symbiotic relationship across all these different species. And one without the other cannot survive. We are all dependent on each other. And I just love that example of the cows and the bacteria and the grasses, because if you take one species out of that equation, they all die. Grass has got to be eaten.
They co-evolve. They co-evolve together, ruminants and grasses.
They're a community, and you can't take one member out and still have a whole community. So the grass has to get eaten by the cows or it's not digested. It just sits there on the surface and there's no more biological activity, and ultimately the soil dies and then there's no more grass and it's a desert. You have to get eaten if you're a grass. That's just the nature of it.
It stimulates the growth.
It does, yes. I mean, grasses evolved to be grazed because they all evolved together. And it's the same for the bacteria. If the cow doesn't eat some of the bacteria, she dies as well. And that means the bacteria have no more habitat. There's no more cow, no more bison to live inside. And likewise, the bison, she's got to eat too. So she's feeding her internal bacteria this lovely grass and then eating their bodies. So it's this really cool thing because cellulose is pretty low nutrient. There's not much to it. But by feeding that bacteria, she's able to produce high fat, high protein bacteria that she can then use to keep her own life going. So everybody does their part. You eat, and then in turn you are eaten. And ultimately life continues. And the only change from year to year is a little more topsoil, which is to say a little more resilience and a little more life. And that was how this planet got covered with so much beauty and such just dense quantities of life, was by exactly those relationships. So we've got 2 options. We can look at an acre of this and we can say, what do we do? How can we feed humans on this 1 acre? Well, we can do problem number 1. We can do agriculture. So we can take all the grass off of that that 1 acre. We can clear all the life from it. So the big animals, the small animals, everybody, reptiles, birds, anybody you might care about, insects, they're all gone. They got nowhere to go. They're dead, essentially end of the line evolutionarily. There's just extinction. Okay. Long night. It's done. So that's over. You've got this 1 acre though. You can put some corn on it, grow some corn on an acre. Meanwhile, the local riverway is being destroyed. All the fish are gone. Whatever trees there were are gone. Like this is just turning into a nightmare all around. The water table's drying up. But for 800 years, you can get some corn out of that plot of land. With that corn, you can do a couple things with it. You could feed some people with it. They could eat some of it. You could decide, this being the age of factory farming, it does make some bizarre economic sense. You could take that really cheap corn and feed it to cows living essentially in a city on cement floors in a steel building. The cows are miserable. You could feed them that corn. It will make them sick because it's not their real diet. It's not their native diet. It's too acid. They will burn holes in their stomachs, kill their livers. All those animals are sick in those factory farms. They limp along as best they can. And then at the end of a year, you've got enough corn on that 1 acre to feed that one cow. You can slaughter the cow, and now you've also got some food for humans, but it's not very good food. It's pretty sick food. The amino acid profile is wrong. The fatty acid profile is wrong. Cows were not meant to eat corn, and we were not meant to eat ruminants that eat corn. This has never happened before in nature. So it's just wrong from beginning to end. But on that one plat of land, that's what you can do with that 1 acre. You can grow corn. You can feed it to cows. You get one cow out of it, essentially. So another plot of land. What can we do with this acre? The neighboring acre right next door. We're going to leave that acre exactly as it is in native grasses. So you've got insects, you've got dragonflies, you've got little tiny reptiles, you've got great big birds migrating through, and then you've also got a ruminant who's doing her part to keep this place alive. And her part is eating the grass, stimulating new growth, fertilizing it with manure, giving it some water. If you're really smart and you're in North America, you're going to use a bison. Bison do this really cool thing. They've got those great big horns on their heads. Mm-hmm. You can picture a bison. We don't know why they do this. It's a really cool thing. They make wallows. So they lie down, and with those giant horns, they dig a hole with their horns in the ground. And they do it where there's water running beneath. We don't know how they know it. Do they smell it? Do they hear it? Do they have some sense that we don't have? But they make a little hole with those horns. They dig a hole, and it's a tiny little mini wetland. So all the other plants and animals, even amphibians, can now survive the summer because of the watering hole that bison just made. And this is how they support their communities, is by making water available. So they do that. So now there's going to be a little bit of water for birds to drink, for lizards to drink. Everybody can have their water. At the end of the year, guess what? You've got the same amount of meat. That 1 acre can support, what do you know? One ruminant. So you've got life that could go on forever. All these species still have a home. Everybody's there. They're migrating. They're eating. They're reproducing. Everybody's happy. Yes, there is death involved. And one of those deaths is going to be the ruminant that will now feed the humans. But I tell you, at the end of our lives, every last one of us dies, and we go back to feed the creatures that fed us. Like, we're not special. We're not out of the cycle. We have to accept that we're a part of it and then do it well. And that is doing it well, right?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't end. There's no end point where it's all just death and destruction and extinction. That first model is very bad. Second
forever, because it can go on forever because it has natural inputs. The inputs are just the sun and the rain. You don't need all these fossil fuels based fertilizers or anything. And the cows don't need, if you're going to raise a cow, it wouldn't need the hormones and antibiotics if you're doing it correctly, because they have the natural bacteria and they're in their natural environment. You don't need to pump them with the stuff.
They've got everything they need. And in fact, 3 or 4 days of just grass-based feeding, the E. coli, the kind of E. coli that's very dangerous to humans that can kill us, that is completely created by factory farming and by the massive antibiotic use. When even just 3 or 4 days of feeding grass, they've proven that the E. coli just completely disappears. And that's because the cow's rumen can stabilize to the natural state that it should be in, the natural pH, and all of those bacteria die when it's back to what it should be. So, I mean, just on every level, it's good. It's good for every single creature gets to just be the creature that they are, have the life they were meant to have, express their nature as grass, or, as a giant Pacific salamander, or as a bison, or as a black tern. We know whatever you are, it's, you've got your calling, you have the reason you were born, you've got evolution, all your ancestors behind you, just have made your body what it is, and it has its needs. And letting nature just be nature, we all get to express that and be happy and grateful. So that's it. That's really our only choice. And For 2.5 million years, that was what people did. We lived as part of those communities. And I have to believe we did it humbly and well because we did it for so long and we didn't destroy anything. There's no evidence that we hurt anything doing this. Like the human race went on and on and on doing this, and it was fine. There were vast herds of migrating animals. There were so many passenger pigeons, they blocked out the sky. Even here in California, in the Central Valley, which is now just a horrible place, just absolute devastation. But there's written records of the first Europeans who settled there. There were water birds so thick they blocked out the sun when they flew. Like that's how many water birds there were in the Central Valley. It's hard to imagine how much life there was. You could sit on a rock for 4 days and watch a single herd of bison thunder by.
Yeah.
4 days. That's how long it took. Like how many millions of animals were in that one herd. It's some kind of utopian fantasy, but that's what this planet was like before we took up agriculture.
And environmentalists will say, oh, the methane from this and that. Well, how did it work back then?
Yeah, there's no way. I mean, there were massive herds of ruminants. They did not trash the planet. We know what's destroying the climate. It's human activity. It's not the ruminants. It's just ridiculous.
Well, the Cowspiracy. So I just finally watched that. I just didn't want to watch it. It's so stupid. But as a filmmaker, I decided I had to watch it. I got through What the Health. It was painful, but I made it. But Cowspiracy, the whole thing was based on a proven lie. Or their error. Like the people who made the livestock's long shadow study came out later and said, we were wrong. We took in way too many. We took in every input possible for agriculture and left out every input possible for transportation. So now you have this whole movie. So I was just laughing to myself. Like this whole movie is based on nothing. The numbers are absolutely backwards. It's more like 4% agriculture and like 21% transportation. So now you don't even have a movie. And then I thought it was really funny too, is he's like, then I went on the website for Greenpeace and they didn't have anything about animals. He talked about that for every single environmental organization that should be on his side. And I'm laughing. I'm like, because it's not the biggest problem. That's why they don't have it on their website.
Because it's not true. They all had egg on their faces. The American Society of Chemists did the math and they were like, you people got this completely wrong. And then they all said, oh, you're right. Yes, okay, we'll do better next time. And they all dropped it. But these ideologically driven, vegetarian types can't let it go. We actually call it a vampire myth. There's actually a word for this kind of thing, a vampire myth, because it refuses to die. Like it doesn't matter how many times you send them all the papers on it. Like they just back down from it. There's other reasons to hate factory farming, but this is not one of them. It doesn't turn out to be true. Yeah, it's actually pretty efficient. I hate factory farming. I have a whole goal of trying to, sort of like you, is how can we fix this? But it actually is pretty efficient. And actually the cows do spend most of their life on pasture and then they go to the feedlots. So the feedlots are a nightmare, but it's actually decently efficient and maybe they're all not that bad. They just don't seem to understand. And also, I mean, if the cows spent that long on feedlots, they would just drop dead. They can't really last it's impossible, more than a few months because the corn is so bad for them. So they're dropping like flies by the end. It doesn't actually work, but it's really hard to get through to people who are super attached. You worry that if this is my personality, perhaps I'm doing it again. So I feel like I've tried to learn not to get that attached to any particular factor figure. Like make sure you know what you're talking about. Have this be validated from a number of different perspectives and from different points, before you really take it up. And, I really encourage everybody, like, don't stop questioning. The moment that your mind gets that rigid, you really have entered something else entirely. You're no longer somebody who's fighting the good fight. You've really entered a kind of fundamentalist mindset, and that's never helpful. It's just never helpful. It's anti-scientific. The whole point of science and the scientific method is questioning, opening your hypothesis, and if it doesn't work, then you get a new hypothesis. On to another one, and it's, I tried the vegan hypothesis. It really didn't work. So keep questioning people. Don't ever stop because there's always better information out there. I think there's a few more really interesting moral arguments. You touched on it about all our ancestors, and they worship the animals. It's the circle of life. You wrote in your book about if a hunter wounded an animal but didn't kill it, it would track it for days. Just to make sure that it died peacefully and wasn't suffering. So many cultures like that. I mean, just in so much anthropological literature, if, you have friends from whatever parts of the world, that's just such a baseline. If you wound an animal without killing it, that you can't go back. home until you do right by that animal. So yeah, they'll spend 3-4 days just wandering through the forest or wandering through the brush because you can't return home and face your people. It's so shameful to have wounded an animal without giving it a quick death that you'll do anything to bring that to a close. And that's how it should be. It's like we're capable of doing this quickly, and well, we should. We owe that to the animals on whom we depend for our lives. It's respectful.
We depend on them. We had worship ceremonies. We had so much of this culture was around worshiping animals and thanking them for what they gave us. And I believe your Native American friend had your favorite quote about, here, you say it.
Something to live, something else has to die. And It's so simple, but it's so beautiful. And it's like, why didn't I know that when I was 4 years old? Nobody told me that. Like it's gone from my culture. I'm sure if, I go back far enough, somebody still knows that. But sort of modern day America, there wasn't anybody to teach me that. And it's really heartbreaking. It's like the really basic things about how to be a decent human are just gone from us.
And you found that out quickly with your garden.
Yes, I did. One of the things you're supposed to do to reduce your carbon footprint is grow your own food, make your food miles basically zero. And I was really into it. And I started learning how to garden. And I found gardening very restorative in many ways. Like it was really good for me emotionally, spiritually. You have that incredible connection to just life. The plants are so alive and they really will talk to you if you talk to them. If you treat them with even a little bit of respect and openness, they will give you things. They will give you medicine or healing or whatever you want to call it. I know this sounds kind of woo-woo, but it's there. I can't prove it, but honestly, try it, everybody. Like you really can get things from plants. Anyway, I'm out there. I'm like, I'm going to learn how to do this. It's this whole new world. I didn't grow up doing any of this stuff. So I've got to learn all these new concepts and these new words and what's an annual and what's a tomato and what's this and what's related to what and what kind of soil do I need and on and on. So a few things you figure out pretty quickly. One is that if you don't add animal products to your soil, you're not going to get good plants. So at the end of the day, it's like, plants are carnivorous. I mean, that's what soil is. It's dead animals and dead plants. It's been broken down by bacteria and other little tiny creatures and made available again. And that's really all soil is. If you're not adding what the soil needs and what the plants demand, you're not going to get healthy plants. And that's kind of rule number one, especially for organic gardening, is you've always got to be amending the soil and perfecting your soil. And it's like, there's no way to do that without animals. And that was horrifying to me as a vegan. It was horrifying. So I would, I remember just going to the store and I was like, all right, I'm going to do this the organic way. So that took out all of the synthetic products. So I'm looking at, what are my choices in terms of organics? And there were basically two things. I could get the package that was essentially made from blood and bone, it's from slaughterhouses, I'm assuming. That's what that was. Or I can get this other stuff that's made from rocks. So it's ground up rocks will provide essentially the same minerals. But it's like, who are you fooling? Do you know how much fossil fuel goes into grinding up rocks? Like no human being can do that. Like, that's just vast amounts of energy to grind up a rock. You've got to be fooling yourself. So I didn't know what to do. It was completely horrifying because neither of these options was good. I could see one wasn't sustainable and the other was, oh, horror of horror. It was dead animals. So, in my case, like, well, I'll find a third option. And that was friends of friends who had goats and they had a giant barn and it was filled with manure. And they're like, please come take the manure. So borrowed a pickup truck, got some friends who could dig. We get this huge load of manure. And at that point, the garden just explodes into life. So I've proved to myself this is true. Like you absolutely do have to add some animal products, but I couldn't close the loop on my own. I mean, it was too horrible. So I made this, to me, it just felt like this terrible, I'm a sellout now. I've gone and used goat manure. I made this little deal in my mind, like, well, they weren't my goats. I'm not the one who exploited the goats. But at the end of the day, my vegetables depended on it. I mean, you couldn't pretend otherwise. So it was just a terrible year or two right in the middle. Like, really, I don't know what to do. This life is not working out the way I expected. And then, of course, you've got the problem with, there's all these animals that live out here too, and they very much want to eat your vegetables for the same reasons that you want to eat them. They're tender and tasty. So I was in a protracted battle with the slugs. The slugs ate everything, and I would replant every few days, and then they would come along and eat it again, and then I replanted again, and then they ate it again. And I went through 5 or 6 iterations of that. And I was like, okay, I'm never going to get any food because the slugs are eating it all, especially when it's young and small. It's really when the slugs love it. I don't know what to do. What do I do? So I can poison them. No, I don't want to do that. No matter what I did, it ended up with dead slugs. So then I thought, well, I could use beer because at least they die happy. But I couldn't do it. Like I tried to do the beer thing. But I woke up in the middle of the night just in a cold sweat, like, oh my God, I'm killing animals. I can't do this. I ran outside. I poured out the beer. So, of course, they ate the lettuce one more time. Well, now what? So then I tried just collecting them and moving them. But there were two problems with that. One is that more just moved in. And also, where was I going to take them? I mean, I went down the road on my bike and there's a little forested area. I'm like, oh, this is so peaceful and wonderful. I'm going to let my slugs go. And I'm sitting there watching the slugs, and sort of adult awareness starts to trickle in through my fantasy. And it's like, there are so many slugs already in this little patch of wood. Do you really think there's room for more? Why would there be room for more? Like, the slugs are definitely going to be reproducing at maximum capacity. You've just condemned however many slugs to starvation. It's not bottomless out here. It doesn't go on forever. It's not infinite. There's only so much space for slugs, and they've already taken it. You can't just add 20 more and expect them to find something to eat. So that wasn't any good. And in the end, that year I just gave up. I just like, I can't do it. There's nowhere to go that does not end in dead animals at my hand. And I gave up, and I was so happy just to give up. I was morally just exhausted by this whole process. And I went to the grocery store, and I was so happy just to buy lettuce. Like, lettuce. God, I didn't kill anything. And honestly, that was the moment I grew up. I just felt like this was the moment when my adult mantle of responsibility fell on my shoulders, and I stood up under it, and I said, you are so fooling yourself. Whoever grew that lettuce killed slugs for you. So you paid somebody to do it for you. You can't pretend there aren't dead slugs out there, and dead insects of all kinds, and dead deer, and dead rabbits, and dead woodchucks, and all the other animals you're trying to keep out with your fence and your this and your that. Some of them got killed, and they did it so you could live, and you might as well admit it. Just admit it. There are dead animals in your food. And I had to admit it. And it was an incredibly hard moment, but it also felt finally honest after all this time of prevaricating. The moral, emotional trauma of this entire process was like, finally, you're growing up. You're just going to admit the truth about life on this planet. It's just the basic arithmetic of being alive. There are dead animals in your body. Face it.
Yeah, it's a good realization. And what do you say to vegans who talk about it's about intent? I didn't intend to kill an animal, so it's okay. And you're eating meat and you intended to.
I just think it's silly. You know that there's dead animals in your food. You know it's the only way to get good vegetables. You know it's the only way to get any vegetables at all. They're going to have to die for your life to exist. So why not just accept it? Stop drawing these bizarre lines that make no sense. There's dead animals in your food. That's what food is. It's dead plants and dead animals. It's all it is.
Yeah.
You know, like every single body is made from all those other bodies. Like, it's just what does intent have to do with it? Like, accept it so you can do it well. It's your only option. Do it well. Do it humbly. Repair the broken cycle. That's the only hope we've got going forward. You can't repair it if you don't understand how we broke it.
Yeah. And accept that this is nutritionally what you need. This is a good segue to the nutritional side of things. Right. We know with modern science what different foods do to our body and how they nourish us and what kinds of fat soluble vitamins you need and bioavailability. And there's so many things that we know. So can you talk about the nutritional side?
So there's a whole bunch of vitamins that are only available in animal fat. And this is just reality. So we can start with vitamin D. Yes, you can produce a little bit on the surface of your skin with sunlight, but unless you live at the equator and you're naked most of the year, most of us are never going to produce enough vitamin D. And so that's most of us alive today. It can't be done. And the main source of vitamin D in most people's diets around the globe, it turns out to be pig fat, because pigs are really good at doing that conversion as well. They're very similar to us. So lard, old-fashioned bacon. And there's a reason that so many cultures are organized around lard. It's really good stuff. It doesn't just taste good. It actually has this huge hit of vitamin D, and it's one of the best sources that there is. Seafood also, you can get some good vitamin D from that. But the moment people can take up pigs, they do. They can eat anything and they can produce huge amounts of vitamin D. So it's really good stuff. So vitamin A is another one. A lot of people get confused because of the vitamin A in things like carrots. So the vitamin A that's in carrots is not actually the kind that humans need. It's a precursor. Okay, so when you eat it, your body has to do a bunch of things to it to turn it into the kind of vitamin A that you actually need. And there are human beings who cannot do that conversion at all. Literally, they cannot make the enzyme that does that conversion. And these people are obligate carnivores. There is no way around it. They have to eat meat. If you are from, your ethnicity is from a group of people who lived in a coastal area or from an island, like say if you're Irish or Japanese, it could be you. because mostly those are the people, that's the ethnic background where that enzyme was dropped a long time ago. Evolution is really good at trimming. The moment you don't need it, great, we're not going to spend any energy doing it. So the moment people got a lot of vitamin A in their diets, we don't need that enzyme anymore, stop producing it. And a whole bunch of people stopped producing it. And that's because we're eating animal fats instead, and we're getting the vitamin A from that. So that's another one. Then there's K2. You can get a little bit of K2 from vegetables, but not a lot. And really the best, most solid, dense forms are going to be from animals. So those are really important. A bunch of other stuff. Cholesterol itself is an incredibly life-giving substance. It does things like gives every cell in your body structural stability. So if you think about every cell in your body has to be surrounded by a little tiny membrane of cholesterol. Human beings, we're sort of interesting as animals. We've got these things called nerves, right? And if you think about it, we are actually a set of electrical impulses inside a watery environment. Now, how is that possible? Why don't we short out? And the reason is because of things like cholesterol. Every one of your nerves is coated in fat, right? And fat repels the moisture. So that's the insulation for every one of your nerves. And that is made from cholesterol. So without it, your nerves just aren't going to work very well. They're going to stop firing correctly. You're going to have all kinds of problems coming down the pike. So cholesterol itself, really important. And as I mentioned earlier, all your hormones are made from cholesterol. So you want to have a happy life, you want to have babies, you want to have a sex drive, you got to get some cholesterol in there somehow.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another important one. Fat
B12?
itself, what's that? B12, yes. There are no plant sources of B12. And I don't care how many crazy vegan writers are going to tell you you can get it from the soil on your carrots. You can't. This is actually very serious. There are vegans every day who turn up in doctors' offices having permanently damaged their hearing and their sight from lack of B12. And that is permanent. You don't get it back once you do that level of damage. Whatever else you're going to eat or not eat in your lives, whatever else you're going to do, if you are considering a vegan diet, don't even go there with the B12. Just take the supplement. Please just take the supplement, okay? Do not permanently damage your sight or your hearing over this. It's not worth it. We know for a fact where it ends. You will damage your sight or your hearing, as well as other ththings. But those, you will regret that. You don't want to do that.
And there's vegans that had brain damage. There's kids that have died. Do you have a few examples of that?
Oh, yeah. There's, any number of these examples of these kids and the parents. It's so hard. You want to be so angry at the parents, and I also understand where they're coming from. For me, it's really terrible because I know that I could have been that person. I was that ideologically bound. In this country and in others, there was a whole cult in Israel where they only ate vegan food, and I think 3 children died and a bunch more were damaged permanently. There was a famous case in France. There's been a bunch in England. There definitely have been ones in the United States. And they insist on feeding their children things like apple juice and, like various rice milk, soy milk, and of course, no animal products. And then, you can read the whole medical case and it's just really stunning. At a year old, the child weighs less than when she was born. So she was born at 10 pounds, now weighs 7 pounds. It's been a year. You'd think the parents would maybe notice. And there's like that level of horror of just what kinds of mindset would let a person starve their own child in the service of an ideology. Like, you've got to see that your child is starving. So then the child has seizures and is finally taken to the hospital, and maybe it survives, maybe it doesn't. But there's any number of these kids that are permanently damaged from that. Also, the thing about breastfeeding, obviously I want to support anyone. Breastfeeding is obviously going to be the best. It's always the best thing for the baby if you can do it. But the level of nutrition in breast milk is directly tied to the nutritional status of the mother. So there's a lot of vegan mothers who think that they're providing good food for their babies. They're not. There's not enough B12 in that milk because the mother herself doesn't have enough. And it can also be deficient in other things, but the B12 turns up a lot in the medical literature that the babies are permanently damaged because the mother was a vegan. So that's something else to think about if this is a diet you're considering. Take that B12.
Yeah.
A bunch of other stuff too. It's really hard to get the correct omega-3 versus omega-6 balance. And this is where things get, I know, a little bit too sciencey. We're going to nerd out on the nutrition, but you need both omega-3s and omega-9s.
6.
Nines as well. There are 9s out there.
Oh, okay.
9s are in coconut. Omega-3s and omega-6s, but it's really hard to get the correct balance. And the thing about omega-3s and omega-6s is that they are converted into further fats that we need. The conversion process, though, is kind of long and complicated for humans. And we only make a certain number of the enzymes required. What this means is, if you eat omega-6s and omega-3s in the wrong ratio, your body cannot adjust for it. Okay, because there's not enough enzymes. You can't just discard what you don't need and then take the ratio that you do need. So it's really, really important to eat them in the correct ratio because of that enzyme problem. And when you're eating an agricultural diet of whatever kind, any kind of seed has way too many omega-6s. They're all really high in that. Plants don't really need omega-3s. They don't produce them. So all of it doesn't matter whether it's avocado, it doesn't matter whether it's, wheat bran oil, like whatever it is, if it's from a plant, it's going to be too high in omega-6s. And you can eat a little bit of that and get away with it. The problem is that starting in about the year 1900, when you had the corporate America starts taking over the food supply, the cheapest, easiest kinds of oils to add to the food they were producing was those industrially produced seed oils. Now, up until that point in history, humans had never eaten them before. It's hard for us to imagine, but people had never eaten corn oil. They'd never eaten soybean oil. Those oils were produced, but they were used for industrial processes. So they were used for paint and they were used for glue. Nobody ate them. So that starts to flood the American food system. Go ahead.
I love this point, this factoid that you put in the book. In 1913, the USDA listed soy as an industrial material, not a food.
Yeah. Yep. And now we all eat it. Right. So what happened? Well, that's what happened. They took over the food supply, and that's the cheapest oil to produce. It takes a lot less time and energy to make soy oil than it ever will to produce a good pound of butter. But the butter is actually health supporting, life supporting. It's filled with all kinds of things you need, especially if it's from a grass-based cow. That soy oil is just going to kill you. So way too many omega-6s in all of those plant-based oils. So you want to avoid those as much as you can. But the problem with the inflated omega-6s is omega-6s are responsible for inflammation, and omega-3s are essentially responsible for calming the inflammatory response. Now, you're going to need both throughout life. Right? There's a reason for inflammation. We need a little bit of it, but we don't want it out of control. So vast numbers of diseases have really been sort of laid at the altar of the omega-6s because they're really based on inflammation. Everything from dementia, Alzheimer's, arthritis, all of this can be traced back to too many omega-6s. So it's a serious problem.
Yeah. Throughout history, we believe that we were eating the omega-6, omega-3 ratio around 1-to-1 or maybe even 1-to-2. So what are we at? Like 10, 100 to 1? Like a lot of people don't understand this at all. Like this was before I started researching this, I had no idea vegetable oils were bad for you. And I feel like 98% of people in America or the world, they're like, oh yeah, vegetable oils, that's the healthy one.
Yeah, because for 40 years now, USDA and a bunch of other government agencies have been telling us, they got on the bandwagon and said this is the way Americans should eat. And they've done just this huge propaganda job. A whole generation of us now has been raised with this idea that animal fats are terrible and these liquid vegetable oils are the good food, the healthy food, the heart attack, whatever food. And it's completely the opposite.
It's the opposite. There's studies that show this. I can link to them in the show notes, but there are studies that show higher mortality rates for people using vegetable oils. Yeah, it's real.
And some of those studies go back to the late 50s, early 60s. So they've actually known about this for 50 years. And they still went ahead and made these recommendations and changed everything. All the little food nutrition panels and all of everything. Just
CSPI.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
CSPI, and especially at high temperatures, these oils become way worse for you at high temperatures. And the CSPI is sort of a vegetarian interest group that poses as a science for public health. And they we used to use beef tallow to fry fries in fast food restaurants, and they moved to vegetable oil. So it's very easy to make a claim that they've done far more damage by doing this.
And they have. There's absolutely no question. So all of this now, the government, all these different institutes and big health organizations, they've all backtracked now. Over the last decade, we've seen one by one, they've all changed their minds. Well, okay. Even on the cover of Time magazine, we've seen the stick of butter and the eggs, and they're all saying, oops, made a big mistake. But, even back in the 70s when they were doing the McGovern Commission, they had to extend that commission for 8 weeks because there were so many doctors who wanted to come forward and say, you can't do this to the American public. We know traditionally what has kept people healthy. We know that these are health-producing fats. You can't just tell people to take these out of the diet. It's never been done before. You're going to do damage. And there were so many doctors, like they gave them another 2 months to talk because there were so many of them. And it didn't matter. They went ahead with it. And now, all these 40, 50 years now has just been nothing but propaganda. The thing to remember, I don't mean to get too conspiracy theory, but the thing to remember is that the USDA, the US Department of Agriculture, they are not charged with anything having to do with public health. Their job is to sell commodity agricultural foods, and that's what they do.
Yeah.
So given the opportunity to say, let's all eat corn oil and soy oil, they did it. And they did it very successfully, and they made a lot of money doing it. Huge grain concerns, but it came at a huge price to public health in America. So here we are.
Yeah, I don't think that's too big of a conspiracy theory, really. Like I talked to Denise Minger about this. She did a lot of research about it, and there's proof of this, that they were trying to push grains on the public. There's even more about food stamps, and that it's cheaper to provide these grains to poor people if they're going to have to shell out these food stamps. Then it's a lot cheaper than trying to shell out meat and vegetables.
Yes, and we should also remember that part of the reason it's cheap is because we're subsidizing completely the wrong things. And this gets more into the political part that we haven't really touched on yet. But the foreign policy in the United States has just gone completely south. It's kind of a nightmare at this point. And I don't mean to blame the farmers, because it's not their fault at all. The people that we really need to blame, there's essentially 6 corporations that control the food supply in the world, 6 corporations. So we've got an oligarchy out there, and they can command prices now that are below the cost of production. And what this means is that farmers, no matter how hard they work, there's no way to make a profit, because at the end of the year, they take in their crop and the price is set by these, it's essentially a monopoly. So when they say, well, we're only going to pay you $1 for a ton, and it costs the farmer $2 to produce it, there's nothing the farmer can do but sell it at that cost. And then what happens is, this is where it all gets really wonky, the US government steps in and says, okay, well, we'll pay you the difference so that farmers don't go completely out of business. So that's what keeps the system limping along. But what it means is that we are subsidizing the worst possible food, because we're subsidizing corn and wheat and soy and all the crap that's making people sick and fat and stupid. And that's the problem. This is not the food that humans were meant to eat. We could instead take all that money and help all those poor farmers out in the Midwest who are committing suicide at extraordinary rates with no hope. They're essentially serfs to these corporations. We could instead help them restore the prairie and put ruminants on it, and we could all have access to really good beef and bison. That could be the food that we're subsidizing instead, while we repair a vast continent that's been destroyed. All of that could happen at once. Those farmers could be self-sufficient in a year or two, because most grass-based farmers are. It's really extraordinary. They can make a living almost immediately, which will never be true for corn farmers. I mean, it's never going to happen. So all of this could happen. We could repair those local economies. We could repair those poor, broken, spirited people who have been so downtrodden. We could repair public health in this country. We could repair the brains of young people living below the poverty line who right now only have access to the worst kinds of junk food. We could actually be giving them food that will give them brains that could help them in generations to come. And we're not doing any of that. It's all about power as ever,
I want to try to do something about it. I just feel like I'm just one person. I know you're on board with this idea, but what is this movement called? I've been trying to call the Sapien movement, which is almost a vegan counterpart. I think you and I share the same ideological values that are with the vegans, but then also opposite, where we believe that the healthy foods are these animal products and vegetables, and not grain and not soy and not wheat, and that we don't believe in industrial agriculture, and we believe that there's a way to do it sustainably and regenerate the soil, and that we can do this. I've talked to farmers. I keep bringing up Gabe Brown on this podcast. He has a 5,000 acre farm doing this, self-sufficient, making money, regenerating soil. So I want to do a separate thing from my film, but start some sort of movement that says, this is what we're supposed to eat, and this is how we're supposed to grow it. And that's what we believe in. So maybe, the vegans have their ideology or their dogma where I'm not going to eat meat because 1, they think it's bad for them, and 2, they think they're opposed to it morally. Well, we have the same thing. I'm not going to eat grain for many reasons. 1, I know it's bad for me. I know I can do it morally too. I think it's doing terrible things to the environment. So maybe I actually can tolerate grain okay because I stay active and I don't have a gluten allergy. So I'm not going to do it because I don't believe in it morally. I think it's horrible for the environment and that it's only taking and not giving anything back.
Well, I mean, their big slogan is meat is murder, but I like to say wheat is murder because it's really how I feel.
Yeah.
It is. It's the worst thing that ever happened to the planet was the domestication of wheat.
Absolutely.
Here we are, 10,000 years later, we've trashed the planet.
It's so crazy. I was just looking into the pyramids. It's a slavery food. We raise wheat so that we could... we fed it to slaves. For one, okay, yeah, talk about it. Why would we want to eat this? You can survive on it. You can get by maybe, but I don't get why people choose to eat the worst possible thing for you.
The reason is because it's addictive.
Yeah, it does. It has that
I honestly think
pathways in the brain. I know people who are addicted for sure.
Absolutely evidence for this. It turns in gluten, especially gluten-containing grains, turn into substances that are called gluteomorphines in your gut. Not everybody does that conversion, but most of us do. And gluteomorphine is exactly what it sounds like. It's essentially a form of morphine that is made from wheat, and you get that little hit. And there is it's one theory about why we started doing agriculture, because none of the other explanations make any sense. The usual thing that most of us learned in school was, well, the population got too big, and so people didn't know what to do. And then they realized, well, if they took over more land and did this thing called agriculture and just grew people on the land, they could grow more people. That's true. You can grow more people. But in fact, the archaeological evidence does not show signs of chronic hunger or malnutrition leading up to agriculture. People are super, super healthy. Boom, agriculture
tall
starts.
and robust.
Yes. And then all of a sudden, you've got just this absolutely collapsed nutritional status. It happens post-agriculture. It does not happen pre-agriculture. So it doesn't make any sense. That's not actually what we find in the historic record or in the archaeological record. So this theory of, well, guess what? We actually thought it was addictive. I think that could be the case. I think that might be why. But regardless of why we did it, we did do it. And this has had horrible ramifications for human society. I mean, we've talked about the health, the downside, and we've talked about what it's done to the planet. But what did it do to human society as a whole? So, I've mentioned agriculture is biotic cleansing, but it's led to a pattern that's called civilization. Now, normally we think of civilization as, I don't know, just a really great culture that has a lot of music and art. And I guess that's one definition. But really, at its core, the word civilization means life in cities. That's what the word means. So what this means is the city has used up its own. Okay. It means people living in densities that require the importation of resources. If you think about a city, it could be as big as New York. It could be as small as where I live. It doesn't matter. The food, the water, the energy have to come from somewhere else, right? It can't be done in the city because there's too many people, right? It's all just stone or concrete or whatever it's made out of, but there's no food there. Right? There's no trees there. There's nothing there that you can use. So it all has to come from somewhere else. And from that point forward, it doesn't really matter what kind of lovely spiritual values people hold in their hearts. You are now dependent on imperialism and genocide. You're going to have to go to your neighbors and take theirs to feed yours. And that's the pattern for 10,000 years. You've got this bloated power center sitting at the middle of it. So it could be Rome, like pick your city. There it is sitting at the middle of it. And it's surrounded by conquered colonies. And so that goes on until it all collapses. So they use up the soil, they use up the trees, they destroy all the water, all the fish are gone, everything's gone. And eventually it collapses. And then it springs up again, a few hundred miles away. And that's been the pattern for essentially 10,000 years. Historically, cities were limited by distance. And that was because two things. One is that you were bringing in all those resources from the hinterlands, but, in the days before fossil fuel, that was with animal power. So you had draft animals of whatever kind. You could only get so much stuff into the city. And that's why there were so many port cities that were centers of civilization was, using the ocean or the Mediterranean or whatever. You could bring a lot more stuff in a lot more easily, on water. But there was still a natural limit to it. You could only take that stuff so far. Food rots, you can only get it. It only takes so long. So they had a natural limit, and that was just about the limits of what you could do with draft power. And the other problem, of course, was that all of this depends on a vast amount of military might. And you can only, the supply lines to keep your military fed, again, could only get so big before they snapped. And the orders back and forth from the command center to the outpost, that could only stretch so long too. And then eventually that broke as well. So you could only have an empire that was so big, and then it couldn't get any bigger just because there were natural limits. And again, they all collapse and then they rise up somewhere else, and then that one collapses and then it moves on. And all the archaeological evidence is the same. The last proteins in the cooking pots are human proteins. So it ends with horrible collapse. We're cannibalizing each other. We're eating the children, whatever. It's never pleasant. You can just see there's just layers of more and more conflict, more and more broken bones, more and more weapons, and then it collapses. All of this changed with the introduction of fossil fuel. So 1800, whatever is basically the year of the beginning of the fossil fuel age. Now there's no limit to the size of the civilization because we can go anywhere and we can bring back vast amounts of stuff from wherever it is we go, right? Because now we're using fossil fuel to transport it all. So we're getting lettuce from China. I mean, it's completely ridiculous. For a plate of food that's maybe 50 calories, we're spending 10,000 calories to get it to us. Never before in the history of the human race have we done something this ridiculous, but that's what we're doing now. There is no future in this,
It's
right?
insane.
I mean, the fossil fuel is going to run out.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no way around that, whether it's 10 years, 20 years. I don't make predictions. I think it's silly, but the end is inevitable. Even though we've learned to kind of pump this whole thing up on the steroid of fossil fuel, it's still going to end. But the basic pattern is still there, where you've got most people are living in some form of slavery. And in fact, by the year 1800, the beginning of the fossil fuel age, 3/4 of the people alive on the planet, fully 3/4 of them, were living in some form of slavery, indenture, or serfdom, because that's what agriculture requires. It's backbreaking labor for piss poor nutrition. Okay. And the thing about it is becomes this terrible vicious circle. Agriculture makes slavery possible because it creates that surplus. And that surplus means you now have specialized labor. With that specialization comes a military. Up until that point, nobody has a standing army. All kinds of adults go out and be the warriors when you need to defend your territory from your neighbors. But there's not an imperial army that's just a standing army all the time that does nothing but war. That doesn't happen. You need agriculture to do that because those people have to be fed. So it makes the army possible. It also makes it inevitable because it's drawdown, because you have to go out and get the resources that you've used up, and you always have to go out and get more slaves, conquer your neighbors, take their stuff, take more people. So all of this is this nasty little vicious circle, and it really is our history for the last 10,000 years. That is what we've been doing. So it's been a disaster for the planet. It's a disaster for human health, but it's also been a disaster for human society. We've ended up with these rigid hierarchies of race, of class, militarism, misogyny, genocide, all of it. And it's all a function of agriculture.
Yeah. And yeah, the disparity of wealth. I don't know if you mentioned that, but the agriculture created the disparity of wealth. We were pretty egalitarian beforehand, but once you have all the wheat, you can store it.
Yes. So it creates a surplus, and then it creates even the concept of wealth. Up until that point, you can see it in what are called the grave goods. So when you dig up a grave, the things that are buried with people. And up until that point, like you said, it's very egalitarian. There might be somebody who has a few more things in the grave, but it's pretty much the same thing. Everybody's buried with their special, they'll have a mirror, they'll have like the little pestle they use to make their herbs, they'll have some jewelry made out of bone, some little necklaces, maybe some special fabric that was wrapped around them, and like the special things that they might have had when they were alive. But that's essentially it. By the time you get to things like Egypt, I mean, you've got a grave the size of the pyramids and like hundreds of dead slaves who are murdered to put inside with the pharaoh, like just lavish amounts of wealth and death that go with it. And that's in a pretty short period of time. And that's what agriculture does. It creates that hierarchy.
Yeah. Oh, man. Okay. I want to see if we can, I think we skipped like a few tiny things, and I'm trying to go back. I don't think we talked about how bad soy is enough. I definitely didn't understand that. I just thought, oh yeah, it's just whatever. It's something vegans eat. I don't really like it, whatever. But it's actually terrible.
Yeah, there are a number of reasons to never eat soy. This is one of those things where, even if you decide you want to pursue a vegan path, even if you want to be a vegetarian, it's your decision, it's your life, it's your body. But I will beg you not to eat soy. Whatever else you do or don't do, please do not introduce soy as anything other than a condiment into your diet. So first big problem with soy is the phytoestrogens. And these are substances in soybeans that look a lot like animal estrogens. So they look like the natural estrogens that our bodies produce, but they're not exactly. They look enough like them that they will attach to your estrogen receptors. And then the actual estrogen that you need can't be used by your body because the receptor is already locked up with the fake estrogen. And they create tremendous havoc across our bodies. There are actually countries where it's illegal to feed soy formula to children because we know that it does terrible things to them. And one of the problems is the amount of estrogen that's in soy formula for infants is equal to giving a child 4 birth control pills a day.
Yeah.
Nobody in their right mind would do that to their baby
Insane.
knowingly, but that is what you're doing if you're giving your child soy formula. And it's not that much better for adults. adults. It disrupts everything about your reproductive system. So this is probably one of the main reasons that African American girls in particular enter precocious puberty more than white girls. It's because of the soy formula. A lot of the women, infant, children, the WIC program, which helps low-income people get food, especially women with children, if you're African American, they won't let you buy dairy-based formula for babies. They will only let you buy the soy-based formula. And that's because I think 25% of people of African American heritage have problem digesting milk. It can be a concern, if you're lactose intolerant, but they just assume it's everybody. It's not worth finding out who. Let's just make them all eat soy. And so there is an epidemic of precocious puberty. Nobody seems to care about these girls. And it's completely horrifying to think of a 7-year-old girl getting her period. The amount of disruption in her life, emotionally, physically. What we know about precocious puberty is that it's a lifetime sentence of really bad problems, like everything from fibroids to cancer to migraine headaches. These kids are just condemned to a life of physical suffering, and there's not really any way back. Like once you do that to a young body, it can't really fix itself. It's too late. So it's a serious problem, and it absolutely affects adults in similar ways. You don't want to have this huge load of exogenous hormones flooded into your body, and that's what soy is. In fact, there's one researcher that I quote who says, these are really drugs, they're not foods, referring to soy. And he himself will not let his children eat soy, and that was certainly my experience of it. So that's number one, is the hormone disruption. Number two is that there's an enzyme in the hippocampus area of your brain that is specifically about the creation of memory. And without that enzyme, you can't actually lay down memory. And soy specifically disrupts the creation of that enzyme. So this is just anecdotal from people that I know, but a scary number of young vegans in my life have had terrible memory problems. I mean, like people who are 25 and just routinely cannot remember, do I go to school today? Do I go to work today? Where did I park my car? I have no idea. They should be 70 before they have those kinds of problems. And it's the soy. There's no question it's the soy. So that's another problem. Soy is also, it disrupts the creation of an enzyme called trypsin. And trypsin is a digestive enzyme that you need. It's created by the pancreas. So in order to digest your food, you have to have some trypsin. And soy blocks the creation of that. So the thing that we're looking at with soy is that plants don't actually want to be eaten either, generally. Their seeds especially don't want to be eaten because the seed is the baby, right? So the parent plant has given the baby a way to protect itself, so that one day it too can be a tall, strong plant. Nature is really good at this. It's like the arms race, they always say. And the way that plants fight back is using chemicals. So seeds come loaded with all kinds of chemicals that make them out and out toxic, poison in all kinds of ways, very difficult to digest. And this is how plants have survived to be the plants that we know today, is by arming themselves against us. So what soy has said, pretty clearly to humans, if you eat me, I will disrupt your reproductive capacity. So here's a whole load of estrogens. Ha ha, have fun with that. And what soy has also said is, if you eat me, I will make you feel really sick because you won't be able to digest me. So here's your trypsin inhibitors. Ha ha. And I remember there was a Buddhist meditation center that I went to for years, and all the food was vegetarian. And there were 2 nights, we didn't eat in the evenings, but there were 2 lunch, the big meal was lunchtime. And there were 2 times we would go for 10-day retreats. There were 2 times during those 10 days when they would give huge soy meals. There would be huge chunks of tofu that were in everything. And I just remember after coming on all this soy information, noticing all of a sudden how the next day after the big soy meals, everybody's having intestinal distress. Everybody. It would just be horrible. People are running to the bathroom. They're having terrible gas. Like it was just, you could hear it in the bathroom. Like it was just so unpleasant for everyone. It's embarrassing. It's clearly painful. And then just knowing just anecdotally, the number of people that I know who had these like really severe problems digesting soy and they didn't know it. So I even had an ex who, not to get too it gets kind of grubby, but like bloody diarrhea from the soy. And this went on for years and nobody knew what the problem was. You go and you drink the barium and they do they're trying to figure out, why in the world are you bleeding? Like what is going on? They can't find anything. And then I found all this information about the soy as I'm coming out of my vegan fugue, and I was like, I'm afraid it's the soy. And it turned out that's what it was. 2 days off of soy, there was never another drop of blood, no more of the cramping. It was over. So I mean, I've saved any number of people now from that level of distress by just saying, you might want to consider the soy. Do you drink soy milk? And the moment they say, yes, I drink soy milk, you're like, okay, I'm just telling you for a week, don't do it. Just try it. If you're desperate, you'll try it. And then it's like, wow, that completely cured it. Yeah, the stuff is not actually edible.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. We have to just accept that it's not a food product. Just don't think of it as a food product. You could be, conspiracy theory type of thing, but it's just agricultural product, almost a waste product, byproduct, to make money. And they're just figured out ways to make money. And like, let's squeeze oil out of it and let's put it in all these like tofu burgers or whatever.
That's what they did.
So just quickly.
One more thing.
Okay, go.
Thyroid. We know that it's a known goitrogen. We've known that since the 30s, and people destroy their thyroids eating soy. I did this. I have Hashimoto's. It's the autoimmune disease of the thyroid. Is another thing that happened to me from being a vegan. And so a lot of people like to say, oh, but the Japanese, they eat soy. Yeah, they eat soy. And you'll notice they have a huge amount of thyroid problems. Hashimoto is a Japanese name. Right? Wow. They've got so much Hashimoto's in Japan. It's called Hashimoto's. There's a reason for that. The thing to remember about how they eat soy in Japan, they do not eat it as a protein substitute, not traditionally. It's used as a condiment with fish broth. Okay. So if you want to eat it the traditional way, feel free, but make sure that it's fermented, that you're only eating a tiny bit of it, and that you eat it with the fish broth. Why fish broth? Two reasons. One, lots of iodine and very supportive things for your thyroid. So the soy might take a chunk out of you, but hopefully the fish broth makes it better. And then the other thing that soy does is it's really good at dragging all the minerals out of your digestive tract because it has such a high level of phytic acid in it. And that's another way that plants generally fight back. Mm-hmm. But if you eat a whole bunch of fish broth, you are, of course, introducing a whole bunch of minerals. So that should counteract some of the bad side effects of the soy. So remember that when people did eat soy, never as a protein substitute, always as a condiment, generally highly fermented, and with fish broth, you're okay once in a while.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's just to make sure people know that it was fermented, and which changes it and actually helps break,
It does help with some of those problems. Not all of them, but some of them it will help.
And in small amounts. And what I was going to add about soy is that some of those giant 6 companies that you talk about that own all agriculture, Monsanto, probably the most well-known, they own like 80 to 90% of soy. Every soy you're eating you're just supporting Monsanto. There's no reason to eat soy ever. I'm so glad I never really ate it.
Oh, you got very lucky. It's horrible stuff.
Yeah.
It's horrible stuff. And it just makes you feel so sick all the time. The stomach ache. Oh, it was just dreadful. Yeah.
Oh man, I wanted to talk about Weston A. Price quickly, and then I wanted to read the actual foods that he found in common around the world. So why I like Weston A. Price? I talk to a lot of people. Since I've been making this film, all I do is talk about it with everyone I meet. And it's great because everyone has something to say, and nutrition and food is close to everyone's heart, and everyone has their opinion. But people always think that I'm just so biased, and it's like, oh, you're on this whole like meat rampage, and all you care about is eating meat and blah, blah, blah. And it's insane because I love carbs. Carbs are delicious, but I'm against them. And also I have no vested interest in meat. I just like Weston A. Price because it's a story of a guy in the early 1900s who had no skin in the game. He was not a nutritionist. He was not involved in any industry of food. He was a dentist, and he just realized that we were doing things wrong, and he went around the world and figured things out. And I think this is just such a good like ace up my sleeve. When I talk to people, I'm like, okay, this guy has no skin in the game. He doesn't care about paleo. He doesn't care about veganism. He just found what was common in thriving societies. Who had the best teeth? Who were the tallest, the strongest? Their jaws were big. They had no cavities. All this stuff. And he went through all over the world, all different kind of societies. And he did find some that ate more meat than others. Whatever. I'm just going to read the excerpt from the things that he found in common. The absolute foods from one or more of 6 different groups were absolutely essential, is the quote. So, seafood, fish and shellfish, fish organs, fish liver oils, and fish eggs. Number 2, organ meats from wild animals or grass-fed domestic animals. 3, insects. 4, fats of certain birds and monogastric, one-stomach animals such as sea mammals, guinea pigs, bears, and hogs. 5, egg yolks from pastured chickens and other birds. 6, whole milk, cheese, and butter from grass-fed animals. This is just unbiased. This is just observation around the world. He did this luckily before all these ancestral living cultures were affected by civilization. And this is what they were doing. And this is why they're healthy. And they had beliefs about these things. And this is what people ate when they were pregnant. This is the food of the gods. This is what makes us healthy. And it's so insane that this list is almost the list that we were told not to eat for the past 6 years.
Yeah. These are the most nutrient dense foods that you could find on the planet. This is it. This is like the bingo, like where you're going to find the most vitamin A, vitamin D, B12, all of it is in these foods.
Yeah.
And we've been told not to eat them to the point where most people have never eaten any of that.
Yeah. People think you're insane for eating full fat
liver.
Yeah.
Full fat milk.
Full fat milk. You're like, are you insane? Yeah. I finally.
I eat butter with a spoon. They look at me like I'm out of my mind. I'm like, try it. It's really good. Get really good quality butter and eat it with a spoon. It's so good.
Yeah. It just takes a little, it's a cognitive dissonance. It takes a second to change it in your mind, because over the past year, I got really into this. And in the beginning, I saw my friends who was a little farther along than me cooking eggs with a scoop of butter. I'm like, what is this guy doing? And it's like, I understand that, wheat and sugar are bad, but what is this guy doing? And then I totally figured it out, researched it. But yeah, it just takes a second. You can't change overnight. It's not like I was eating butter that day. You figure it out, you learn more, and then you realize all the benefits you're getting.
And I highly recommend his book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration is the name of the book.
Yes.
It's not meant for a general audience. I mean, it can get a little bit long in the middle. But the most important thing, honestly, if you don't have the stamina to read every single page of the book, look at the photographs. Yeah. Because the amazing thing about Weston Price, he lived in the exact right moment. There still were people around the globe who were eating their traditional foods. His goal was to go to every single continent and find somebody somewhere that was still still achieving perfect health generation after generation. And then, like you said, take copious notes and do research. What were they eating? What are the commonalities here? Is there a basic human diet? But so those people still existed. It would be almost impossible to do this today. But what also had just been invented was a portable camera. So he was able to take photographs of them. So everywhere that he went, he took pictures of their teeth. So you see them sort of making that funny face where they're pulling their mouths open, but you can see their teeth. And then he would line them up sometimes. He would find these families where the first 2 or 3 children were born and the family was still eating traditional foods. But by the time the last child is born, there's been a break with the traditional life way. And now they're eating white flour and white sugar and vegetable oil. And you can see the difference in the health status in these children. The first 2 or 3 look gorgeous. Beautiful facial structure, perfect teeth, long, strong bones, all of it. And by the time you get to the end, the kids, it's all crooked. Their dental arches are too narrow. Their teeth clearly don't fit. They've got cavities. Some of them even have club feet. It's just fallen apart. And it only took a few years of the wrong food. So he's got absolutely gorgeous pictures, and they will stun you. They will chill you. They will inspire you. It's just amazing to see how beautiful people can look. Like, that's the human template. That's really what we're meant for, is that level of health. It's just very, very compelling stuff.
Yeah. And also huge is what he didn't find. He didn't find any vegan cultures. He didn't. No, what else?
Not one. Well, it's interesting about Weston Price because he himself was very disappointed not to find a vegetarian culture that achieved health. He found the vegetarian, the worldview, the value system, he found it very compelling himself. He wanted us to be able to be vegetarians, which a lot of people don't know that about him. He actually was hoping that was what he would find. It's not what he found. He found the healthiest people were the ones who ate that really nutrient-dense animal foods. That was what made human health possible. So it's not what he wanted, but being a scientist, he had to admit it.
That's what I was going to say. He is an amazing scientist and unbiased. And yeah, I think more people need to not get caught up in belief systems and just be open to other sides. And I try to not ever have really strong opinions. And when I went about this film, I kind of had my opinions, and then I found some conflicting information and I loosened up on those. And I think I have a more holistic view on things, and it's going to make for just a better film and more well-rounded look at life in general. It's just to never get too invested in one opinion.
There is a Buddhist saying, I wish I could remember. They know who said this, but I don't remember who. It was some big Buddhist scholar, monk person, who clearly was very wise. But anyway, what he said was, I remember the quote, even if I don't remember his name. What he said was, any belief, if held to too strongly, will become a wrong belief.
Mm-hmm.
There's absolutely truth in that. Like, you can think it's the right thing, but if you get stuck in that fundamentalist mindset, you will turn it into something wrong.
Yeah.
And it's a warning to all of us, like, just be careful, it's always keep that open mind, always investigate the other information and just see, does your belief hold up?
Yeah. I want to ask a vegan, what if you lived 50,000 years ago? Are all these people unethical monsters? What would they say? Or what would you say back in your vegan days? I don't even get how you rationalize that.
I would have had a very contradictory response, because part of me would have said, there's a vegan origin story that says, oh no, actually humans used to eat a plant-based diet. All we ate was plants and we were so healthy and wonderful. And then we did this terrible thing. We learned how to kill animals, and then we killed all the animals, and now here we are in this warlike society. And that was what I believed. So I would have said that. And to the extent that I had a little more actual history, I would have said, no, agriculture was this wonderful thing. And when we took up agriculture, that was when we were able to have this flowering of human culture. Of course, everything that I was reading was exactly the opposite, that was when everything went to shit.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I couldn't really integrate that. So I only believed, the lovely, the mythos of, yes, agriculture, civilization, this is the way it was. This was all the beautiful things. This is when we invented pottery and when we invented weaving and told stories and learned to write eventually. And it all came because we learned how to eat plant-based foods. So either way, I had like a story that covered it.
Okay.
As a vegan.
Yeah. I guess it's a lot of justifications and different stories.
And none of it's based in reality.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not true. So
it's hard.
It's hard on vegans. It's hard. Like, it's what you want to be true is not actually what's true about physical reality and really about your place in the cosmos. It doesn't end up being the thing that you wanted. But it is a beautiful place. That's the thing. Like, you can switch it out for the actual truth, and it's okay. It's hard, but it is okay. Like, you still do have a good place here.
Yeah, you can, like you said in the very beginning, you can still have the same values and still believe in the same things, just have the correct information. Yeah, I think that the biggest problem is they just have the incorrect information, and I can't blame them. The only problem I have is that they're just misguided in their information. And then when that overlaps into my world or our society, where they're pushing it on other people and they're lying in films and spreading it. Every week I talk to someone, because obviously I bring this up every second with every person, every Uber driver. Like, I have my friends like won't let me talk about this anymore, but they have this idea that it's the healthier way, or it's the only ethical way. Or they all have this, and then they'll always just go back to a movie like Cowspiracy or What the Health, and like, oh yeah, well, 5 cigarettes, eating 1 egg's like 5 cigarettes. I'm like, that's the most insane thing I've ever heard. I don't even know where to start. Okay, I have like 2 more things. So what about nice and calm vegans who seem to have it figured out and are actually doing kind of well, and they're actually supplementing? And what do you think?
They're on drawdown. They're on nutritional drawdown. There's only so long that your body can store these nutrients. So unless you're living on number of industrially produced vitamin supplements, there's not any way to do this long term. I mean, if nothing else, you're going to wear out your insulin receptors, and you're getting way too many omega-6s because you're eating all that grain and all those beans. And that's just what it is. It's just way too many omega-6s and way too much carbohydrate. And our bodies were simply not meant to process that every day. So that's always going to be a problem. You're going to end up with deficiencies ultimately. So you can do it for 5 years maybe without too much trouble, but eventually the rubber does hit the road. And anybody who's done it for longer than that is honestly lying. They are cheating, quote, sometimes.
You sneaking a fish every month, that's the only thing keeping you alive.
Yeah, and a lot of them do that. And in fact, I actually got an email from one of the big sustainable fishing people in Alaska, and he wrote me a really nice email, but he said, I can't name names, but I just want you to know that pretty much all the main vegan figures in America today buy fish from me, and I'm not allowed to tell anyone that, but that's where they send all their friends when it stops working for them. They're all eating fish, and they're all getting it from me. So you're exactly right. Keep doing what you're doing. But none of them can come forward and say that because they've built their lives and their reputations, their careers on the big vegan thing. And I guess they feel like they can't back down. It is hard. It's a bad moment, when you have to say to everybody, I was wrong.
Yeah,
Like I had to say it to all my friends. I had to say it to my mom. That's the real moment of a grown up. Can you tell your mother she was right? But you have to do it. And I would have more respect for them if they could just say, I was wrong about this.
Yeah.
Like I've probably done some damage to some human beings, and I'm sorry. There is a better way. But they don't. A lot of them don't seem willing to do it. So they're all buying seafood from this guy in Alaska, and you and I have both heard about it.
I heard about it separately too. So
Yeah,
I just
it's
can't.
happening.
I can't believe, these big people, like the big vegan doctor. I'm not going to name them all, but I know all their names. Yeah,
they're all doing it.
I can't believe that they're just spreading this information to these poor people, and that's such an injustice to secretly be sustaining yourself with this awesome source of nutrition and then pretending you're not.
And telling other people, full knowing that it's not going to work for them long term. Just tell them the truth, Like, why are you lying?
Well,
you're only doing damage to the people and they're doctors, right? They took the Hippocratic Oath. They're not supposed to do harm.
It's crazy. And I did figure some things out in my quest for the whole story and not being biased, that there is a different metabolic state that they're going after if you go very low fat. Denise Minger talks about this, and it makes sense. Like, why are the Simone in Bolivia or like the Hadza, or there's all these cultures? Well, they were eating very low fat, and they're eating like whole food tubers, stuff like that. But they were also eating tons of nutrient dense animal products, even if they were lean, and they were eating liver and heart.
10%, still something.
Okay. The thing is, these vegan doctors, they're saying, oh, this works. And there is a little bit to it because yes, your body can go tolerate carbohydrates in this different metabolic state. I'm trying to coin the term failed environment metabolic state. I like that it has a negative spin on it. It's like, why are you trying to live in this failed environment metabolic state? This has happened because of either there was an ice age or this environment is too close to the equator and we can't grow. There's not enough animals around, or even modern times, if it's in modern China and rural China, and they just they can't afford the meat. And yes, they are surviving on this very low fat, high carbohydrate diet. But why are you trying to do this?
And they also have a really high rate of stroke. They don't get the heart attacks the way we do, but they get strokes instead.
There's different problems, yes, that happen with this. I really can't understand why people choose to try to live in this sort of hack that the human body adapted to be able to be okay. And yes, certain in Bolivia, they're doing okay because they're doing it such whole foods. And, there's all these articles in Discover magazine or whatever, like New York Times, like, oh, let's eat like the Simone. Okay, just because they don't have atherosclerosis in their veins doesn't mean that they have perfect nutrition, but they're also doing a lot of different things than us. And also, I don't understand why people are trying to promote this when they know you can't pull it off. You can't try to promote a low-fat diet because no one's actually going low-fat enough, and you're eating this trash like tofurkey burger. That's not the same as what these hunter-gatherers, modern tribes are doing. So it's insane. Low-fat diet is absolutely insane. And you know what? Today just happened. I was out filming today. Actually, I barely made it in time for our interview today. I went to a grocery store to film some B-roll, and I could barely find low-fat products anymore. There was definitely dairy products. Okay, definitely low-fat dairy was everywhere. I went down so many aisles, and it's not being promoted on packaging anymore. I was so happy. I'm like texting my friends that are into this stuff. I swear to you, not one thing in the freezer aisle had low fat on it. Not one of those pre-made meals, any of that stuff. It's actually changing, and I never realized it because I don't shop in the middle of the store anyway.
Yeah, no, I don't either. I just go around the edge.
Yeah, so I was blown away. I was like, I can't get any footage of this. Nothing. I found one product per aisle. It was always like in all the crackers, there was like one that still was holding out with this low-fat message. But everything else, so that's why I'm so hopeful. Yeah, I'm so hopeful for the future because people are demanding with their wallets on what they want. And okay, the industries, these food industries aren't stupid. Their whole thing is to make money. Yep. The government gave them a green light with the food pyramid to make low-fat products. They made billions. Now they're understanding everything on the packaging was about protein. It was so awesome. It was like 15 grams of protein, and some of it was even low sugar. This messaging is I'm so happy.
Working.
Yes.
Good.
So happy.
I remember the first time I went to a regular grocery store and on the milk it said pasture raised, 100% grass fed. And I nearly had a party there in the store. I was like, I can't believe it. It's on a package in a store. This was like, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago now. But I was like, oh my God, we might actually win. It's actually being used as marketing. They know that people know what this means now.
Yeah.
And it was this huge moment for me to see that in a store, like not at my farmer's market, not the farmer I was going to, just personally, but in a store on their package. That's what it said.
Oh, so exciting. And yeah, I can't wait for this film to come out and just try to get the more information out there. And I think
very important. Very important.
Yeah, it's all about information. It's because so many people are putting so much effort and money and willpower into trying to be healthy. People are like, oh, it's because of fast food, you know? No, you think everyone in the whole country just all of a sudden got lazy and slobby and like a mess at once? No, we know that fast food's bad for us. I see some of these other low carb films or any type of films. They're like, oh, sugar's bad. Fast food's bad. Everyone knows that. Yeah. Yeah. Once in a while, I'll go to In-N-Out on a road trip and get a burger. I don't care. I know that it's bad.
Once in a while, nobody cares.
Yeah, I know that it's bad. It's not like I'm an idiot and it's like, oh, this is so healthy for me. It's that people are just have the wrong information and they're trying to do this low fat thing that is impossible to do correctly and it just doesn't work in your body. So, okay. Do you have any other thoughts of the future of how do we change this? Can we make the sapien movement a real thing? I actually started building a website. I don't want it to be about the film. I'm not trying to make something about myself. I want to do something that everyone can just join in and support.
It's a great idea.
Yeah.
It's totally great.
Yeah.
See, I always thought, they had that stupid Meatless Monday thing. I thought we should have Grass-Fed Friday, and it could be the same thing, where everybody invites their friends over and you give them a little talk about how great grass-fed food is, and you feed them a grass-fed burger and some grass-fed cheese.
Well, why not?
That you bought locally, and that could be like a big campaign to counteract Meatless Monday, which just makes me so mad every time I hear about it. So, no, totally good things. Got to push the grass-fed farmer, grass-fed message. Yeah.
Well, let's do it. I'm going to start this website. I'm going to get everyone involved that I've been interviewing.
Do it. Great idea.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We've talked forever.
Okay.
Wait, we still have to close this up. Definitely get The Vegetarian Myth. This is the one book that I want everyone to read. So I've read so many good books lately, but they're all about their individual topic. And I just love your book because it covers so many things and wraps up this awesome message that I think everyone needs to hear. It's like the one book I'd recommend to the world. Like if everyone in the world could read it, I think people would just have a different idea of nutrition and about politics and economics and health and everything. So,
well, that is the wrap up that every writer wants to hear. We live for that moment. So thank you.
I'm dead serious though. I'm not just saying that because I've never said that about any other book before. So
that's very sweet. Thank you.
LierreKeith.com, LIERRE Keith.com. All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Good. That was great. Thank you.
Hey, if you're still listening, please hit the 5-star button if you use the Apple Podcast player. It really helps us stand out so more people can find the show. Tell a friend, eat a steak, support us on Indiegogo, do some pull-ups and dips, eat some salmon and beef liver, start your own garden, read in the sun, smile, be happy, and come back next week for some more.